Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. And for this episode of Sonar Fishing, I'm doing a little bit of research out here on the hill. This is one of my favorite spots to just sit and go on my Navionics app on my iPad and just kind of look at lakes that I'm going to fish, this season on the schedule. Just kind of revisiting some of the fisheries that I've loved to fish over the years. And, figured that I would just end up doing a video about, kind of breaking down some of these fisheries that I love fishing. And the first one that comes to mind is Lake Okeechobee. Lake Okeechobee is by far my favorite tournament lake, not because it's the best fishing lake overall. I don't think that Okeechobee nowadays is as good as it was probably 10, 15, 20 years ago. It's definitely not its heyday. It has some issues as far as the vegetation that has been being killed off. They've been targeting the vegetation in that lake, and it's just not as healthy as it once was. Hopefully it'll get back to its prime condition. And we'll be back to catching some really impressive, legend status bags out there. And and I say that, but it's not like you're talking about, real small bags on Okeechobee right now. In fact, it's going to take, mid-20s to win. So it's still pumping out giant bags. It's just not quite as good as it once was. But then again, I haven't fished it for a few years, so it might be getting better. But anyways, I figured that, a lot of people end up going down to Okeechobee, down to Florida this time of year to do a little bit of fishing on some of these legendary lakes. And I figured I'd just go through the Navionics app with you and kind of share my knowledge of Lake Okeechobee, because I've spent a lot of time on Okeechobee. It's by far, like I said, my favorite tournament lake, and I just have a connection to it. So let's go ahead and kind of break this lake down. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. Let's go ahead and start that now. All right. So essentially what we've got here is Lake Okeechobee is just one giant big puddle. That's essentially what Lake Okeechobee is. Not very deep in the middle at all. It's very consistent depth wise, from north to south, east to west. I think in the deepest point of the lake, you're probably looking at 15 feet, maybe something like that. What does it say here on the app? Yeah, somewhere in that 15-foot range. That's kind of the deepest point. And all of the real good bass cover is around the shoreline. So on this lake, in the middle of the lake, there's really nothing going on. So as far as bass fishing goes, it's only the edges of this lake. So the first thing that I like to look for on Lake Okeechobee is, you're looking essentially at these large grass flats. So where this dark blue is, that is where the majority of the submergent and emergent vegetation is going to be. And so you see on this western bank, and the southwestern side of the lake, there's a ton of real shallow flats, and there's just a huge assortment of different types of grasses, both emergent and submergent. So this western and southern end of the lake tends to be the most popular, and this is a huge amount of water to cover. So this is not, a lake that you can cover in just a couple days. You got to pick a small region, and hopefully you'll cover it in a day. But so I would say the majority of your best fishing on Lake Okeechobee, just kind of condense it down, is all the way from Taylor's Creek, okay? And back here you've got a lot of vegetation. It's not as dense as some of the other parts of the lake, but you've got good shallow grass flats, lots of reeds, some lily pads, that sort of thing, all through here, just north of the Kissimmee River here. And then below that, that's when you really start getting into the bulk of the grass flats and the productive areas on Lake Okeechobee. You start out here, you got Kings Bar, this kind of big grassy island here, and then you go down and you've got just miles upon miles of just real large grass flats that you've got to explore. And the thing about Okeechobee is that every mile, every stretch of this lake has potential for a big bag. However, you just have to spend time to figure out what areas are where the fish are congregating at that moment. Every single tournament that I go and fish on Lake Okeechobee, I fish a new area to do well. I never tend to like stay in one area because the fish tend to shift around on these grass flats. So, you might find them in a place like Tin House, which is this kind of area right here. Or you might be finding them closer to like Indian Prairie Canal here, which is this one right here. So you just got to really put the trolling motor down, cover a lot of water, but these are good general areas. And really what I'm looking for and kind of my process on Okeechobee is I drive around on the boat, I stay on plane, get inside the weed edge with, in the multitude of boat lanes that they've got on Okeechobee. Of course, be very careful because Okeechobee is known for having some really, really narrow and shallow boat lanes that could be dangerous. So be very careful with that. And just drive along. And the ingredients that you're looking for is, number one, you're looking for, a little bit cleaner water. So you're going to want to look for that darker, clearer water. That's going to be a big key. And then after that, you start looking for some of the secondary cues to tell you whether or not there's life in the area. Whether that means that there's some herons working in a certain area and not other areas, or you actually see some surface activity. Whatever it is, you're having to start to look at some of those little cues that some other people missed. The presence of coots is going to be pretty. They're pretty prevalent. They're all over the place. But, some areas will have more coots than others, and that can denote more submergent grass than some areas. So that's another thing to look at. But I can't sit here and say, oh, you got to, look at this area, or you got to look at this part of the lake. All of Lake Okeechobee from, like I said, that Taylor Creek area, following that western shoreline in the south, and going all the way down to Creamer over here on kind of that southeastern bank. All of that produces, and then you've also got another area which is called JNS, which is on the northeastern side of the lake that also has some good grass in it. Okay, so that's another area that's lesser utilized, but still, there have been a lot of tournaments won out of there, and so it's not like it doesn't get any pressure. It does get some pressure, but those are the main key areas. And the next thing that I really look for on Okeechobee, and really kind of where you can give yourself a starting point, is look for any indentations in these shallow grass flats. For instance, here you've got in between Kings Bar and the shoreline, you've got this indentation here, this kind of bay. I'll call them bays because they're huge areas. And then this Tin House area right here, you can see you've got this indentation here. You got another indentation around Indian Prairie, and one down here. This is the Harney Pond area, very, very well known. Harney Pond, and also Monkey Box and Fish Eating Bay and all that. And then you got Cochran's Pass. So essentially all these areas that have these little indentations and bays, those are going to be your key hot spots. Those are going to be great places to start and look. because that's usually where the most suitable spawning habitat is in these areas. Those bays where you have the deeper water that kind of pushes into the what I call the emergent shoreline, the emergent grass shoreline, the reeds and everything. When you have the deeper water that goes a little bit further into those flats, that's usually a sign that you're going to have harder bottom. You're going to have, you're going to have better spawning habitat. So that's why those areas are so common to hear about. You got, tin house and monkey box and observation shoal, but you got Cochran's Pass on there, and then you've got the south end that has a bunch of different great areas, and so those are kind of what I tend to focus on. You would spend weeks upon weeks just trying to fish everything in between. So I really tend to, if I'm going for a tournament, I tend to focus on those bays and indentations. And I'm not usually going like way into the grass. Okay, usually you find the best fishing, I'd say, and it depends on the time of year, and obviously spawning, they tend to go a little bit shallower, but I usually tend to stick within a few hundred yards of the outside edge grass line on the main lake. So the main lake grass line. Some other things to think about is wind direction. So if you're going to Okeechobee, you're planning a trip, the first thing you got to pay attention to is the wind direction, because if you've got a tremendous amount of cold fronts and real heavy cold wind blowing from the north, blowing into the south end, that's going to greatly affect the areas that you might want to fish on that south end. And conversely, if you have a lot of wind from the south, regardless if it's cold or warm, that can really muddy up areas on the north end. So you really got to pay attention to wind direction, the intensity, the temperature, and also how dense the cover is in the areas that the wind is affecting. Because if it's really windy, or it's the cover is really dense, and even if it's super windy, you don't have to worry about the water dirtying that much in some areas, because you've got that great vegetation barrier that keeps that dirtier water, the sediment and all that, out of that area. It may dirty up a little bit, but it's not going to make it completely unfishable. But other areas, you cannot say that. Some areas, you have a little bit thinner edge of reeds on the outside edge, and it's just not going to protect it from a heavy wind. All right, so some auxiliary things to look for on Okeechobee. First off, this lake is surrounded by what we call the rim ditch. So the rim ditch, you can't drive around the entire lake through the rim ditch, because there's some areas that it just dead ends, where you got like a big, like here, it just dead ends here. But the rim ditch, depending on where you're at, I would say that some of the best fishing I've experienced in the rim canal and the rim ditch is on the south end, especially around all these different cuts, the intersections of the main lake channels and the rim ditch. The rim ditch is pretty deep, so you got depths of 30, 40 feet in some instances, and so there's a lot that you can do. It's just lined with all this old reef rock that was scraped out of the earth there, and so you can use any technique that you use for like riprap presentations, stuff like that. I've caught them on Carolina rigs like crazy. I've caught them on crankbaits like crazy, jigs, that sort of thing. And you just got to figure out some key areas in the rim canal, especially where you've got some type of current blowing into the rim ditch from the main lake. So like if you got an eastern, if you got some eastern wind, maybe Uncle Joe's cut here, where the wind's kind of blowing directly into the cut and then intersects into the rim ditch. That could be a good situation. But You know, I'm a little bit iffy about, you know, the rim ditch under normal water level conditions. When the water is super low, like when I first started fishing in Okeechobee, it was so low that you could not get to the emergent grass line. Like, so all the places that we normally fish right now with normal water levels, there was zero way that you can get to the grass line. So we were only fishing the rim canal and you know, the ditches like Indian Prairie, Harney Pond, and all those different canals that had deeper water, because that's where the water was. In fact, you had to run like at least a mile off the grass line, you know, the outside grass edge on these grass flats, to just stay safe while running your boat. That's how crazy it was. I think the water level was like at 9 foot or something like that. So but other than those real low water scenarios, the rim ditch and the canals can be so-so. You know, it's not something that I technically feel. I always feel like you can catch fish in there. Okay, I'll say that you can go catch fish, but from a tournament scenario, it can be very, very risky, because you can have one good day and then zero completely, because it just doesn't replenish like other parts of the lake will. Another area that has, you know, been good in the past, that I remember when I was fishing BFLs and stuff, was the Kissimmee River. You know, fishing any different structure within the Kissimmee River, whether it was the spillway when you had a lot of current coming through, that was a big deal, or, you know, fishing intersections of little cuts and stuff, even just throwing a spinner bait or a chatterbait on the edge of the grass in the Kissimmee River could play a role. But so there's a lot of things you can do. But I would say that as good as the canals look, they can burn you just as easily. But if you're going down just fun fishing and say it's really windy on the main lake, for sure I would go check out, you know, any of the canal systems, you know, whether it's Taylor Creek on all those different, what I call the keys, where you got all those different residential canals, or you're fishing JNS, which has some great fishing opportunities in the JNS part of the rim ditch. Or if you're on the south end, you know, there's great places to catch fish all over the place. You just got to spend time and figure out where the little sweet spots are. But for most of the fishing under normal water level circumstances, the emergent grass flats, you know, those traditional areas are going to play the biggest role. As far as like which region of the lake is going to play the biggest role, that's really up to the current trend. So like, for instance, it always seemed like every time I go to Okeechobee, one portion of the lake was fishing better than another. And I don't know if that's because fishing pressure tends to push fish into different regions and they just kind of go through this kind of cycle, or what it is, you know. And a lot of it has to do obviously with the environment, the water clarity, the suitability for the bait fish to be there, a lot of different things. But I also think fishing pressure also pushes those giant groups of fish. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of fish probably, you know, and pushing them around the lake in different areas. I think they move a lot on Okeechobee is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, I mean, it just really depends on what the trend is, what areas of the lake are playing the biggest role. This is not a lake that you're going to, you know, be able to show up and say, I caught them here, you know, 5 years ago. Let's go check that out. You know, yeah, you could check it out and you might be able to catch some fish, but the likelihood that it's as good as some of the history that you've had in that area is very low. It's not like going to a reservoir, like, you know, reservoirs here like Lake Chickamauga. Every single year I know where the fish are going to be holding during, you know, the post spawn, during the ledge months. Okeechobee is not the same way. You got to put in the legwork. You got to go out there, cover water, explore. You know, a bait like the Z-Man Turbo Fatties is one of the best tools that you have at your disposal to, you know, just make long casts on these large grass flats and reel the bait back in and just, you know, keep the trolling motor on high. That is the biggest, to me, that's the biggest key to Florida fishing, is keep the trolling motor on high with a handful of baits like a swimming worm, like the turbo fatties, and just covering water until you start getting bites. And then you can kind of slow down and fine tune things. But yeah, it's not like you're gonna have a rock pile that always produces, or a point that always produces. It's going to change a lot. That's just the nature of a a natural lake like Okeechobee, especially Okeechobee. Okeechobee is so susceptible to change. It's incredible. I didn't hardly recognize Lake Okeechobee the last time I was there for the tour 2 years ago. I still ended up getting a top 10, which was great. But if I had just been fishing by memory, by history, I would have done terrible in that tournament, because it didn't look like anything I'd ever seen before on Okeechobee, because the hurricanes, between the last time I had been there, had completely changed the entire lake, and also the spraying activity and stuff like that. So, which brings me up to another point. If you get the opportunity to sign a petition or to support the efforts that are going into, eliminating and reducing the amount of spraying that's going on Okeechobee and the other parts of Florida, please take a minute to do so. Florida is has a crazy amount of great resources, natural resources in that state, and for some reason they've just decided to completely nuke some of the best resources they have, and I've seen it over the years. It's such a shame, because these lakes are just they're treasures. They're just gorgeous fisheries with a wide variety of vegetation and animal life, and we definitely want to protect that. So, and it also affects the rest of the state, as far as the health of the Everglades, and then the coastal ocean areas. The whole state relies on the heartbeat of lakes like Okeechobee, the water resource that is honestly seems to be being mismanaged. So people like Scott Martin down in Clewiston, they're working towards creating a lot of awareness for that. So if you ever get the opportunity, if anybody ever hands you a clipboard with the opportunity to write your name on a petition saying, to reduce the amount of spraying, do it, because it is a really, really big deal. But anyways, guys, that is kind of my rambling breakdown of Lake Okeechobee. It is a awesome fishery. It is my favorite fishery. And I think that if you guys learn how to break down a Florida lake better, you're going to enjoy this lake even more, because it has a lot of fish. And when you start finding those areas that the fish are in at that moment, oh my gosh, it's incredible. So anyways, guys, that is my take on Lake Okeechobee. Make sure you check out the Navionics app. I have it on both on my iPhone and my iPad, but my iPad, I use it a ton. I love it having it on this bigger screen. It's a big, tremendous, helpful tool for breaking down lakes like Okeechobee. So anyways, guys, thanks for watching. Make sure you like, share, subscribe. I'm going to see you out on the water. Take care.